I have a large collection of books, and in order to continue with my obsession, I frequent a lot of bookstores that I stumble upon. I like going into places like thrift stores or a few record shops in my area that sell used books at discounted prices. I do sometimes purchase new copies, but honestly, used books are my favorite. It's just my personal opinion, but I tend to gravitate towards the more worn-out look that used books have. Not to mention the lower price tag. It's a simple way to grow my collection without going broke. A few days ago, I was out running errands, and I decided to drive a few minutes to a new coffee shop that had opened in a nearby city. I had seen my friends and family members raving about it all over social media, and since there seemed to be a grocery store near the shop anyway, I decided to take the slightly longer drive over to see what all the hype was about. I spotted the coffee shop rather easily, as it was a pretty large green and black building in the middle of a shopping square. As I pulled up into the drive-thru, a bookstore in the corner of the square caught my attention. Once I ordered and received my coffee, I parked in front of the bookstore, wanting to check it out before going grocery shopping. It was a pretty old-looking building, which was odd since the surrounding shops all had a newer, minimalist look to them. It was called Novel Books, according to a large peeling sign out front, and they were apparently also having a 60% off sale. As I walked up, I could see rows and rows of bookshelves that covered the entire inside of the store. I reached the door and pulled it open, stepping into the store. It was much colder in the shop than I had expected, and had I known this beforehand, I probably would have brought a sweater with me. The walls inside the store were painted black and had a few random movie and music posters randomly pinned up. There was only 2 cash registers at the front of the store, and there was one woman standing in front of one, leaning against the counter while she looked down at her phone. Her hair was split up into a few different sections that were braided and twisted into small buns on top of her head, each one with different colored braids. Both her arms were covered in tattoos. She was covered in jewelry. She glanced up when she heard me walk in and put her phone away. "Welcome to Novel," she said, waving at me. I waved back as I made my way to the closest shelf and began scanning the books. They didn't appear to be categorized in any way, which was a bit of a hassle, but one that I didn't really mind. I spent a few minutes looking up and down the shelves near the front of the store before moving around to the ones behind. When I turned around and started to look across the shelves, I could see out of the corner of my eye that the worker was watching me from the front of the store. I thought that was a bit odd, but we were also the only 2 people in the store at the moment, so I figured she was just trying to make sure I wouldn't steal. I spent a while making my way towards the back of the store as I sipped my coffee, which was helping me stay a bit warm despite the freezing temperature inside the store. When I was about halfway into it, I noticed that it was slightly darker towards the back, and that most of the lights were either turned off or just not working. I could still see pretty well though, so I continued. I could tell that it was still getting slightly darker the further into the store that I went, and I decided to turn around and get a look at just how dark it had gotten. That's when I noticed that the layout of the store changed further towards the back. Instead of the bookshelves being placed side by side to create rows, they were arranged to make multiple hallways with more than one point of entry. Sort of like a maze. I figured it was some sort of quirky thing the store did to draw attention. And once I got to one of the halls, I hesitated a bit before finally deciding to try and make my way around the maze. As I walked around the small walkways, I thought about how much larger the store was than I had originally thought. From the outside, it seemed like it would be the size of a small bakery or something similar, but once I was in, I could see that it was fairly large and about the size of a large grocery store. I continued to walk through the small maze of shelves, starting to notice the heavy silence in the store. I hadn't noticed it before, but there was no music or anything playing, and it was instead dead silent. Even my footsteps were silent due to the carpet in the area. I had picked out 3 books that I was thinking about buying and decided that I had had enough of this weird, dark maze thing inside the store, so I began to make my way towards the front of it. and that's when I realized my mistake. I had been so concentrated on the books that I hadn't paid any attention to the path I had taken to get here. I freaked out for a bit before deciding to just start walking. It's not like they would make the maze impossible to escape from, right? What good would it do to have people stuck inside your store? I tried to keep calm as I attempted to walk back to the front of the store. But I couldn't stop my mind from creating ridiculous scenarios to spike my anxiety. What if this was a human trafficking front? What if the worker was going to hunt me down and kill me? What if I wasn't supposed to make it back out? I wasn't sure how long I'd been walking, but it seemed like far too long. I'd only been in the shop for about 20 minutes, and there was no way I could have gotten this far from the entrance. It seemed like the longer I stayed in the store, the darker it got too. Eventually, I started to worry that I was just going in circles, and I thought about calling for help, but I didn't want to seem dramatic, so I decided to at least try a bit harder to get out by myself first. I stopped at an intersection of shelves and looked towards the shelf to my left. The first book on the shelf that was eye level was a copy of Wuthering Heights. I grabbed the book and pulled it out of the shelf a few inches. If I was going in a circle, I would end up here and see the book and could use this to figure a way out. I took a right and walked down the small walkway until I reached the next hall. I glanced at the shelf to my right and pulled out a copy of Frankenstein, and then took another right. I kept doing this, taking a few lefts and rights, before I eventually ended up at the intersection with the Wuthering Heights copy. This time, I took a left, followed the same pattern as last time, pulling out books so I would know if I had been down that road yet. I did this a few times, making sure I took a different turn each time, but somehow, I always ended up back at Wuthering Heights. I had taken every possible route, and I still wasn't able to get out of this maze. I decided to start calling for help, ignoring the embarrassment of having to have an employee guide a grown woman out of the store. "Hello?" I called, waiting for an answer. I heard nothing in response, so I shouted a bit louder after a few seconds. Still, no response. Not even footsteps coming in my direction. "Is anybody there? I'm still back here and I think I'm lost," I called. Silence. I reached out to the bookshelf in front of me and rocked it back and forth for a bit, trying to see how sturdy it was. Eventually, I was able to push it with enough force to knock it backwards, and subsequently knock down all the shelves behind it. I felt really bad for making a mess, but I didn't know any other way to get out. I could hear the sound of the shelves falling in the distance and watched until I was eventually able to see the front of the store again. Relieved, I made my way to the register. The employee was still standing there, seemingly unaware of the mess I had just made, looking down at her phone. Sorry about the mess. I kind of freaked out back there," I said when I neared the register. She didn't reply. I walked closer to her and waved my hand in front of her face, but she didn't move. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked. Still no response. I set the books that I was carrying down on the conveyor belt and slowly backed away towards the exit. That's when I noticed that it was pitch black out. No sunlight, no moon, no stars, no streetlights, nothing. Just thick darkness that extended out forever. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had been sealed shut or something. I pulled as hard as I could, but nothing happened. At this point, I was really freaking out and desperate to get out of the shop. I tried kicking the door open and throwing books at the windows to break the glass, but it was no use. The entire time that I was attempting to escape, the employee was standing in the exact same spot, unmoving. I don't know how long I've been in here. I've tried to keep track, but it's hard when you don't even have sunlight or moonlight as a reference of time. I have my phone with me and I've tried making calls, but they won't go through. My battery is dying, and soon I won't have any method of communication, so I guess this is my last resort. I hope someone sees this, not just so I can get help, but so they know to stay away from this place if anyone ever sees it again.